See a town, stucco pink, fish belly white, done up in wisteria and swaying palms and smelling of rotted fruits broken beneath trees, mango, papaya, delicious tangerine. Imagine this town rising from coral shoals bleached and cutting upward through bathwater seas, the sunken world of fish. That's what my wife, Meredith, calls the ocean. Her father was an oysterman. Of course, that trade's dead now, like so many that once sustained this paradise. Looking from my storm window, I can see Meredith's people scavenging the shoreline. Down they bend, troweling wet dunes with plastic toy shovels, yellow, red, blue. The yellow one I know belongs to Meredith's mother. I want to call to Helen to wave and exchange greetings, but I know she'll never acknowledge me after the awful things that happened to little auburn-haired Sarah Miller early last week, down in my basement. Tragic. The dog is coming.
That's okay.
Where are you going? You there? How'd you like to go back there for a minute and I'll come get you later? I lived on the Upper East Side, and I made ends meet, and I wrote stories. I wrote stories, and I sent them out, and I got them back, and I wrote them, and I sent them out, and I got them back, and I began to suffer a bit of a depression over what I was doing, and I think it wasn't because stories weren't being taken. I think it was because the stories were themselves not particularly alive. I did sit down, and I began what would become the first novel, and I wrote my way into about 5 pages, and it was a very different kind of thing. It was daunting, but it also seemed a little foolish, you know, as a thing to try to do. And so I had a kind of uneasy relationship to it. I would work, but I also was afraid. And eventually came to a point at which I had thought that, what was I doing? After quite a number of months, I had a day, an afternoon walking. I think I was on 86th Street, near where I lived at the time, and I was walking up the street. I think it was, if I remember, it was sort of the end of the day, and people were coming up out of the subways, and so there was this sort of, you know, there were people, and I was thinking about the novel that I was trying to write, and I found myself wondering what other people had. What did I have? I had more than a project. I had engagement, and I felt really lucky. And I wondered if other people had that companion in their lives in some way. What was it? What was it? Because I had this. I became more comfortable with the time it really would take, and I even began to enjoy that time. And from that point on, working on this was more of a pleasure. And less a terror. Before it went into production, I also took it back 5 or 6 times. And so I would take it back, and I would look at the books on my shelf, and I would look at the authors and the novels, and what I'd written seemed to me really very skeletal. And so I would call the editor, and I'd say, don't put that into production. And then a few days later, I'd run into town again with another manuscript, and I'd say, here, you know, I'm done. And then a few days later, I would call, and I would say, don't put that into production. And this went on for over a month again. And I panicked and called a friend, a writer I knew, and I said, I can't publish this. You know, what am I going to do? And he said, you know, listen, you're not going to make this perfect. It's for you to publish it and understand that it is flawed, and it's something I've thought about a lot forever since then. Maybe I didn't need to compare what I was doing to Proust and Faulkner, you know. And he said, publish it, and then write your next book, you know. And hung up the phone and began to restore the manuscript, and I just took it back to where it had been at the beginning of that, you know. And I called up and I said, don't put that into production. I took that other one in, the original, and I said, here, and that was it. And I walked away. I don't sit down to work and feel that I know what I'm doing. at all. I never have, you know. I do know how to do some things, but you know, you're kind of only as good as what you just did, and that feeling only lasts for a short amount of time, and then you're back to frustration and feeling inadequate and maybe not even competent to do what you maybe think you might be trying to do. But I think too that that's where, if there's going to be any kind of growth for a writer or an artist or something, you know, I think that that's where some of it's going to occur. It's not going to occur because of a feeling of satisfaction and that's ongoing, or a feeling of that somehow one is you know, dominated this form or even assimilated it. So it's so much bigger than that, you know, and it's so much bigger than, you know, I am or ever will get near. And then the only way to fight that is to just be messing with a paragraph. It's the only way, you know. I really feel like I'm still starting, you know. I just feel like I'm still starting.